Welcome to the New Earth Entrepreneurs Podcast, where innovation meets sustainability. Building a better tomorrow today. We interview change makers and visionary leaders redefining success for the planet. Here you'll find inspiring stories and solutions that matter. Welcome to the New Earth Entrepreneurs.
Jason, thanks for joining me today. Excited to hear about both HydroPhos, HydroPhos and Solutions and Green Lighting Energy, two companies that are tackling sustainability both in unique ways. So I'd like to just delve into your story. If you could just tell us a bit about how both companies were founded. I understand Green Lighting was started with a personal experience involving your family, and HydroPhos came about from an innovation challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. So a little bit about me. I've wanted to be a social entrepreneur for pretty much my whole life. I've always loved the idea of being an entrepreneur and kind of having that financial freedom, but also being able to make an impact on the world that's actually scalable. And so the pathway of being a social entrepreneur was kind of a cool combination of those to me. My first company, which is HydroPhos Solutions, was founded during my sophomore year of college, where I just brought together a group of friends to participate in my college's social innovation challenge. And sure enough, we surprisingly did well. HydroPhos was kind of like an idea that came out of an ecology class that I took. I was learning about the phenomenon of eutrophication, where there's excess nutrients in the water, whether through agricultural runoff or through wastewater treatment plants, and that causes these dense algal blooms that are very damaging to ecosystems, human health, real estate value, fishing industry, etc. And around the same time that I was learning about this problem of eutrophication, I was also learning about the circular economy business model, which I found to be awesome because it kind of returns this very industrialized society that we have to the way that nature works. Nature works in cycles. There's no real waste products through natural processes. And so when looking at the problem of eutrophication, I was kind of thinking, okay, there's all these nutrients going into the water. They must be useful in other places if you could just recover those nutrients in a form that would be usable. And so that was kind of the genesis of HydroPhos Solutions. Is we came up with this idea, and I later found out it was not an original idea, but we came up with this idea to essentially take phosphorus in particular out of wastewater from wastewater treatment plants and then redirect that phosphorus into the fertilizer industry to kind of close the loop there, because there's also a global phosphorus shortage due to unsustainable mining practices and stuff like that. And so it kind of makes phosphorus into a renewable resource at scale. And so that's HydroPhos. Green Lightning, I founded a few years later with my girlfriend's brother. He happened to know and recently learned how to do solar installations, and he was kind of thinking about starting a business, but he didn't necessarily have the business background that I had. He's very much a builder, so he was great at installing the systems. And so around the same time, he was kind of talking to me about some of the solar stuff that he was doing. And because of his interest in solar, both of our parents, who talk a lot, were kind of getting solar estimates from other installers. And when we looked at the prices that they were getting, they were egregiously high. Like it was kind of hard to believe that it would be that expensive. And so we looked into how much would it really cost to sell a solar system, as a company, not even just as a favor to our parents. And we ended up finding a way to save both of them almost 50% on their solar prices, just by being a smaller company, because the bigger players, they tend to have a lot more overhead. They tend to have their own warehouses and their own trucks and their own people to drive the trucks, and ultimately infrastructure has evolved where we don't really need to have any of that in-house. We kind of figure out how to make our operations really lean and just provide great prices so that regular everyday people all of a sudden can afford solar. And so that was the genesis of Green Lighting Energy. We decided this is awesome because we can sell the same exact solar panels, but for a smaller fraction of the price, and this would be compelling to people. So we kind of got off with Green Lighting Energy, Both of our moms were our first customers, which we are eternally grateful for and very much love to talk about it. And then we were kind of just off to the races with that. And that business is doing really well too. So I know that was kind of a long story, probably more than you needed, but happy to talk about anything that's interesting.
No, that's perfect. I love to hear that. And go moms for support. Go y'all
Yeah.
for figuring out, yeah, really a problem and solution fix. And I mean, 50% of cost savings, that's huge.
Myself.
What was it?
I said I was surprised myself to see that it was actually possible to do that because most of the cost comes from just buying the materials themselves for the project. But we found that, the solar installers out there, they're upcharging that by like 200% or something. So we're not doing nearly that much, and we don't have to.
Yeah, and the innovations that y'all are able to drive, coming in later, and just knowing the different kinds of innovations that you can utilize. If we can break it down. I'd love to hear a little bit about HydroPhos solutions. I know y'all focused on preserving ecosystems by recycling phosphorus. Could you explain why the issue is critical and how your solutions impact the environment? You already did there a little bit, but if there's any extra to give to that.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's so many layers to kind of both sides of the phosphorus supply out there. So breaking down eutrophication a little bit, there's two main causes of eutrophication, and we actually address both, one directly and one indirectly. So the first cause, and this is what most people are familiar with, is the agricultural runoff. You put a bunch of quick release fertilizers onto your farm and then it rains. And because all the nutrients from those fertilizers are in the soil all at once, the runoff from that precipitation, if that ends up in our waterways, there's just a massive influx of nutrients like phosphorus is a big issue, nitrogen's a big issue, potassium sometimes is an issue. And so that causes this overgrowth of algae that causes the eutrophication problem and just ruins everything. So that's one side. And then the other side, which most people don't hear about, but is actually a larger cause of eutrophication, is wastewater treatment plants and just the fact that they're trying to, work on limited budgets to process our water. And at the end of the day, there's a lot of stuff that is in our wastewater. They're able to take most of it out, but sometimes they don't have the infrastructure to take out things like nitrogen and phosphorus, and it ends up in our water. Now, fortunately, the EPA is kind of cracking down on that with regulations. They're putting like a required amount of phosphorus. You can't go over this limit. So the wastewater treatment plants are kind of being forced to comply with those regulations, which makes it really great market timing for us, but also gives us more of an opportunity to help the wastewater treatment plants comply with those regulations, because the fines that they're facing are like somewhere between, I think, $5,000 and $25,000 a day for violating them. So it's pretty intense, the kind of costs that they could incur that way. So those are kind of the two places where eutrophication can come from. We obviously target the wastewater treatment plants directly by taking the phosphorus out of the wastewater. But what's pretty cool is that the way in which we take that phosphorus out, the product that we get at the end of the cycle is a slow release fertilizer. And so if you use slow release fertilizers on your crops, you are way less likely to be causing the agricultural runoff problem, because not all those nutrients are being released into the water, into the soil at once. So if it rains and some of that runoff goes into a lake or a river, you're not getting as much of this massive influx of nutrients as if you use a quick release fertilizer, which are very common. That we can kind of address both sides of that. And then another little thing I'll dive into is that eutrophication has a massive impact on climate change, because it results in a lot of methane emissions. And as I'm sure you know, methane is like 35 times more potent than CO2. And so 1 unit of methane, has a disproportionate impact on the climate. And so by being able to prevent eutrophication, we can also impact climate change as well as the aquatic ecosystems, which is kind of what we generally focus the most on when we talk about it. And then on the other side of things, with the kind of where the phosphorus comes from today, it comes from mines. And most of the world's phosphorus is in just two countries, is Morocco, which has about 40% of the world's phosphorus, and most recently Norway. they literally in the last 2 years, they discovered a store of phosphorus in Norway that doubled the world's known supply of phosphorus. And so, but let's just talk about kind of what we've seen in Morocco and some of the other areas. Firstly, phosphorus is a very important resource because you cannot make food without it. There's no like kind of synthetic replacement for phosphorus in the plant growth process. And so it's one of those resources, kind of like uranium, but with not as many restrictions as uranium. But it's actually restricted. Most countries restrict how much phosphorus they can export to other countries, which means that if most of the world's phosphorus is just coming from these two countries and a few others who have like single-digit percentiles, then that means most countries are at risk of not having access to this nutrient that they really, really need to grow the food to feed their local population. And so our solution at scale would actually be able to allow every country that puts it in their wastewater systems to have a domestic supply of phosphorus. This would also affect costs because let's say you're in the United States, which is where we're both at. If we have to import phosphorus from Morocco or Norway, we're paying a lot more for our phosphorus because we're shipping it across the Atlantic Ocean, right? And when you bring up prices of fertilizer, you bring up prices of food, and that affects everybody. So that's another kind of fun area. Again, more of the impacts on the phosphorus side come at scale, but that's another really fun area where at scale, we would actually be able to reduce prices of food at some level. And then just like a final piece I'll touch on with the phosphorus mining is that perhaps needless to say, it's very destructive. And because most of the world's easily accessible phosphorus has been found, they need to do a lot more invasive mining these days. So they're mining at the bottom of the ocean. They're mining deeper and deeper into the Earth's crust, and that exposes a lot more heavy metals, including things like uranium. And when those are exposed to local communities, it can have kind of the reverse effect of what you want as a phosphorus miner of destroying the local agricultural industry because you're releasing all these heavy metals and things like uranium into their crops. And depending on where you're getting your phosphorus from, there's also kind of child labor and slave labor implications. Totally depends. That's like a whole other issue that we don't need to dive too deep into right now. But, if you're getting your phosphorus from a wastewater treatment plant, that that's ethically sourced. There's not this complex supply chain and all the difficulties of really knowing that things were sourced ethically. So there's a lot of problems that we have the opportunity of solving if we can get HydroPhos to scale. And so that's what makes us really passionate about this project. We kind of just started it as college students, not really knowing what we're doing, but we became so passionate about it that we just were like, somebody has to do this. Might as well be us. Let's go after it and see how far we can get.
Amazing. Yeah, this is much more far-reaching than I would have initially considered hearing about it. How long have you all been in operation, or how long on the process are y'all?
Yeah, so we've been kind of working on it as an idea for about 4 years and then going really serious at it for about 2 years. And, just talking to some of the traction that we've been able to have, we were super lucky to actually start it as college students because we got supported by all of these amazing entrepreneurship competitions that we had the pleasure of competing in. Obviously, there was the first competition through our school, but then we kind of realized that we could do that at other schools that allow students from outside. And we were actually able to bootstrap a lot of our initial development just off of these entrepreneurship competitions that we did. And now we're kind of at the stage where we're getting investor capital and we're getting very close to having a finished product that could then be installed at a wastewater treatment plant at scale. So that's pretty exciting, but that's kind of where we're at right now.
Amazing, amazing. I think my next question leads right into that about just being in the early stages, working on the go-to-market strategies and raising funds. My question is, what strategies are you using to break into the market, and how have your recent wins in competitions like the Techstars and Blue Swell helped in this journey?
The competitions and the accelerators now that we're participating in have been super invaluable. I mean, we're all doing this for the very first time. So being able to learn from people that have gone through the journey before is just amazing. And similar with the competitions I see is kind of like a training ground for us. And it helped us crack through that chicken and egg problem that a lot of hardware startups come with, especially infrastructure startups, where it's so expensive to create just like an initial prototype of your product that it's really hard to even get the funding in the first place to do that, especially as college students where we don't necessarily have like a pedigree or anything that we could use to get the money. So all that whole process was extremely valuable for us. Very grateful to everyone that helped us like kind of learn how to pitch our business and do all the skills that we needed to actually get to this point, which there are many people that helped us. And then speaking to the second aspect of your question to kind of go to market, our approach has been very much a data-driven strategy. So because we've had that chicken and egg problem, and it kind of becomes a chicken and egg problem still, the more that you grow, what we do is we get the funding for some milestone that we can accomplish, and then we accomplish that milestone. In this case, it's been product development milestones. And then we use the data that we achieve, that we create, to then justify the next level of funding. And so that's exactly what we did with the competitions. We actually were able to, with a pretty small amount of capital, get through 3 different technologies that we thought might work. 2 of them didn't, 1 of them did. And we were able to do lab testing on that. And then our lab testing enabled us to secure a small scale pilot with a local wastewater treatment plant. And from those tests and the small scale pilot, that kind of helped us get into programs like Techstars and Blue Swell, which gave us more funding, which are now enabling us to not only complete that small scale pilot, but then start looking towards a large scale paid pilot and being able to fundraise further for that. So that's been kind of our strategy, kind of molding together, yes, what our customers want to see in terms of where our product is at, but also recognizing that fundraising and having the money to actually get there is absolutely critical. So we've kind of molded those 2 together in order to make a strategy that makes sense for us. And so far it's working. We'll see, but so far it's going well.
Amazing. Yeah, it sounds like y'all are making solid incremental progress. And I see that y'all are aiming to land your first big customer. Do you have any kinds of organizations or partnerships that you're targeting to help make that happen?
Yeah, I mean, some of them are already underway. So, for example, both the Blue Swell and the Techstars Water Tech and Sustainability Accelerator, they both have kind of like a public-private partnership associated with them. And so that's come with a lot of great connections to potential customers, but also to potential partners. So actually a lot of members of our Techstars cohort, we've been talking to them about doing partnerships because they all work in some form of water technology. A lot of them work in water treatment, and some of them, our systems fit together pretty nicely. So we've been talking to them about like, okay, we can remove the phosphorus, and then that enhances the value proposition of your product as a treatment product, and vice versa. So we can kind of have that kind of partnership. So 1 + 1 = 3. So that's kind of the stuff that we're working on right now. Yeah, tons of interesting stuff along the way. We've also been talking to a lot of suppliers for our filtration medium, and it's kind of setting up what our supply chain is going to look like. Lots of great people in that space as well. So lots of good partners. You absolutely need partners. So we're working really hard on that for sure.
Amazing. Yeah, I'm excited to hear about what kind of cross collaborations you can come up with. And in terms of like long-term vision for HydroPhos, do you have any kind of way you see the company impacting the way phosphorus is managed on a larger scale? You mentioned some, but again, just any more detail.
Yeah, I mean, at scale, even not at scale, right? If we were able to get into one average size wastewater treatment plant in the US, by our calculations, that would produce enough phosphorus, if you translate that into fertilizer, to feed about 80,000 people. So as we scale, it's going to alleviate a lot of pressure on our food systems, and it's going to alleviate food prices and fertilizer prices, which make a big difference to farmers. There's a big conversation about how it's really tough being a farmer and how difficult it is to make money because you're a price taker, not a price maker, if you're selling things like fruits and vegetables. And so this makes farmers more profitable, but also a lot of those savings can be passed down to the end consumer. And another thing that is super exciting to me is when we talk really, really big scale at a global level, we can actually enable countries, as I was mentioning a little bit earlier, to get resource independence when it comes to phosphorus. And to me, that's awesome because so much of the problems we see in our world are around resource problems, like, for example, water is a big one, lithium. You can just go down the list. There's so many problems with countries kind of using resources for geopolitical goals. And I would love to just level the playing field for phosphorus because we need it for food. Hopefully people don't play around with that one if everybody can have the kind of infrastructure that we're creating. And then having a big impact on taking away this eutrophication problem from our aquatic ecosystems. Selfishly, I grew up in the Lakes region of New Hampshire. Luckily, we don't have too much eutrophication there, but I could kind of imagine as I was learning about this problem how awful it would be not to be able to swim in those lakes, those wonderful lakes that I grew up with, swimming in all the time. And so being able to actually clean up lakes that previously people either weren't swimming in, or maybe they were, but they were having health impacts. Now those bodies of water are going to be clean, which is going to lift up real estate value for the people that live in those communities and enable things like tourism and other boosts to those local economies, as well as alleviating climate change and being great for the wildlife there. So the vision is that there's a lot that we think about and are really excited about for the future of the company.
Amazing. Again, so far reaching these impacts. I grew up down in the Panhandle of Florida, and we dealt with a lot of coming down out of the Mississippi into so much of the channels into that. A lot of nitrogen, especially too, is a part of the algae blooms down there, but I'm sure phosphorus and other things that I'm not aware of. But yeah, amazing to hear all this. If you're open to it, we're getting to almost like a time where I would consider, but if you have some extra time too, we can delve a little more into green lightning energy, maybe just kind of moving in. So seeing the impressive track record, having saved homeowners over $550,000 in electric bills so far. Let me know if I'm quoting that correctly or not.
Yeah.
Nice. And I'm curious what you mentioned about this, but what inspired the focus on affordable clean energy, and how do you maintain the cost effectiveness in such a competitive market?
Yeah, great question. Like I said earlier, it just was kind of like, oh, well, I want my mom to be able to make this investment. And then I was realizing that there's a lot of people out there in our community that are like my mom, where it's just tough to make that initial investment into solar. But if you can pull it off, it saves you so much money. And obviously it's great for the environment. So another thing that we think about at Green Lightning is like, the more people we can enable to afford solar, then the more people are going to get solar, and the better it's going to be for the environment from an emissions perspective. So that's kind of what really excites us there. When it comes to how we're able to streamline our costs for our customers, one thing I'll say is that we do not compromise on quality. So a lot of the cheaper solar installers out there, you'll see them selling like Chinese made solar panels that only last like 10 years. We still use the best solar panels out there. Ours are expected to last for 30 years. They're warranted for 25, right? And we use all the best materials. We use electricians that have been doing this for decades, but we've just structured our operations so that we're able to outsource and minimize any of the costs that are not absolutely core to the delivery of value of the product. So for example, let's think about things like storage and distribution, right? A lot of the big solar installers, they have a warehouse, they have trucks, they have people that are driving these trucks, right? So they're managing all of those operations. Well, when something happens, like for example, interest rates increase and less people get solar, then those larger companies are kind of stuck holding the bag because they don't want to lay off their people, which I respect. But at the same time, they're having trouble actually affording the size and breadth and depth of their operations that they've built. And so we've just been really thoughtful about how we structure it, because since we're new, we are coming in where there's already infrastructure developed for storage and delivery. Our suppliers deliver within 24 hours. So there's no reason why we would need a warehouse or any kind of trucks or people internally. We've also done a similar thing with our electricians, especially starting out. It's very expensive to hire an electrician to be in-house all the time. So we work with electrician firms that exclusively do solar installations, but they're contractors, and they just go around doing like hundreds of installations a year in our state. But because we're able to leverage that, we're not subsidizing a ton of overhead in our pricing. So there's just tons of things like that that we've been able to outsource. And to be honest, a lot of the connections that I've been able to make through HydroPhos in the startup space has helped us to kind of be ahead of the curve in terms of new technologies, new partnerships, and ways that we can streamline our operations to bring lower cost to our customers. But, at the end of the day, it's still a business. We actually make the same margins on a percentage basis as our competitors, but we just have way lower prices because we've been able to streamline things. So those are just like a couple of key examples, but there's a lot of work that we've done into that, because like I said, it's important to us that people can afford it, because if people can afford solar, then it's better for the environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Amazing. I love to hear too that crossover that you're getting from the strategic partnerships over at HydroPhos, and great to see. I'm excited to hear how you continue to build. Yes, I would check. So you mentioned this is kind of like adapting to the market challenges. You mentioned that demand has been affected by interest rate hikes, though it's starting to improve. How are you adapting to these changes, and what strategies do you have in place to boost sales as rates decrease?
It's a great question. And to be honest, it's something that we've struggled with quite a bit. We have an amazing partner at Green Lightning. It's like this wonderful credit union out of New England. They give people the best interest rates that they could possibly get on the solar. So again, something that's really important to us in lowering the cost. So that's one thing that we've been able to do. Unfortunately, this kind of goes a little bit against our core mission of reaching everyday people, but we have, with the interest rates, had to target people that can just afford to pay cash upfront for the solar installations, because they're not worried about the interest rates as much as somebody who's going to have to take on financing, because ultimately solar is a very long-term investment. It's like a 30-year investment, and most people are thinking, and this is not necessarily the wrong way to think about it, most people are thinking, okay, well, if I just wait a year when interest rates are lower, then I'll get a way better deal with respect to my monthly payments for the loan, and we'll just get solar then. No big deal. And that's kind of true. I mean, you are still kind of spending more money than you have to on your electric bill during the process, but I understand why people are doing that. So that's one strategy that we've kind of had. Another thing that we do is we have kind of like this, invite only referral program where people will get a small commission for referring people to a company. So if you install if you refer us to somebody who ends up buying solar, then you'll get, say $500 for that. And so that's also been a nice way of incentivizing word of mouth, because ultimately, there's a lot of lead generation platforms. There's a lot of digital marketing that you can do. But ultimately, the thing that's going to convert the best is someone saying that they had a really good experience with us, or that they know of us and trust us at least. And so we're kind of trying to move the needle on that, because it can be a lot of work to kind of bring somebody to the table on such a big purchase like that. So it's partly incentivizing people, but it's also partly our way of saying thank you for doing that work to kind of explain to somebody how solar works. One thing that's been kind of surprising to us is how many people are like still don't quite understand how solar works as an investment. most people know of solar as a way to improve your environmental impact, but haven't necessarily been familiarized with the numbers on how much it can actually save you and kind of the nuances that come with owning a solar system. And so we really appreciate people that help us with that, or at least help us get our foot in the door. So that's one thing that we've been thinking about. And then we've also given people discounts for if you sign up right now and not a year from now, we'll give you a further discount on your system, even more of a discount than we would have given you. So, which ultimately may not necessarily be sustainable from a business perspective, but we're just trying to get our foot in the door in the market right now since we're a new company and since it's kind of a tough time with interest rates being higher. So those are some of the things that we've been trying. I'm definitely still in the process of learning how it works with a higher interest rate environment, but luckily it seems like there is some pressure coming off of the interest rates lately. So I'm very much looking forward to lower interest rates. I think it'll be great for the solar industry.
Yeah, I'm glad you're keeping strategic and being so considerate too to how you're having to find the right kind of clientele while still trying to adhere to that mission of making it accessible for folks. Definitely a balancing act for people who can afford and help further your mission and help spread the cause that you're working and the business that you're working towards. And I see it too. I've got noted that Green Lightning Energy has also preserved over 3 million gallons of water and averted tons of CO2 emissions. How would you measure and communicate these environmental benefits to your customers?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so the water thing, when I first started getting into solar, that was really surprising to me, but also made me happy because, my background with HydroPhos. And so the way that it actually works is if you're getting your energy from the grid and the grid does not really rely on clean energy so much, you are using way more, your personal water footprint is way higher than it would be if you got a solar system because of how water intensive it actually is to manufacture fossil fuels. It's extremely water intensive. And so the average homeowner in the US saves about 16,200 gallons of water per year by going solar. And so you're not going to see that on your water bill, obviously, but you will see that in terms of the, macro impact that is being had. So that's how we talk about water. It's like, actually, most people didn't know this, but if you're kind of divesting from fossil fuels here, you are saving tons of water in addition to your carbon emissions. And for carbon emissions, there's a lot of data out there on how much carbon CO2 getting solar averts. And so we kind of rely on that data to communicate to our customers. And I'm glad to see you kind of quoting our website because I just recently put together like a very rudimentary ESG methodology for us to use to track all of that stuff. And so now when we talk to customers, we get a lot of customers that are concerned about the environmental impact. And we could tell them like, this is exactly how much we think your system is going to save in CO2 emissions or in water. So that's pretty awesome. And we're currently looking for a partner who recycles solar panels when they're done at the end of life. But I think we have time on that because we use the solar panels that last for 30 years. So we shouldn't have any panels that need to be recycled soon. But that is absolutely something that we are thinking about and excited about because, again, with my circular economy background at HydroPhos, I know how important it is that you're not just creating waste products that end up polluting in some way, shape, or form.
It's inspiring to hear about. It's exactly what I think we need is more business owners and businesses that are taking into consideration the full circular impact of the resources, not just immediately, but just like that with the water that's not being used in the fossil fuel production, just really being able to both understand, be able to communicate, but just like being involved in something that is having those lower impacts or diverting the impacts into more sustainable ways. I'm curious too, kind of for the what's next for Green Lightning Energy. You mentioned plans to double or triple sales in 2025. What's your strategy for achieving that kind of growth?
Yeah. So the way that we've kind of observed things working in solar is it's a big snowball effect. So once you have a few customers, and it's really hard to get your first few customers. Luckily, we had our moms and a few people we knew, and some people that we didn't know. But once you have a few customers, it kind of snowballs from there. it's really growth in solar is largely driven by word of mouth. It's like, hey, I'm having a barbecue at my house. There's like 30 people that come over. They notice that I have solar. It's kind of like a fun anecdote to talk about. And then they ask, like, who did that for you? Do you feel like you got a good deal? Whatever. And that's how we kind of see our sales ramping up. And we've put in those incentives, of course, for people to refer us, right? So that's part of how we're thinking about it. Also, since we've gotten a few of these jobs, we can reinvest that money into things like digital marketing, which I think is kind of an artificial way of driving sales in solar, but I think is kind of almost a must have, especially as a new company where we don't have that giant snowball effect where tons of people are coming to us. And so I would kind of split it into those two areas. We've also thought of doing some kind of creative things. Like, for example, it costs almost no money to set up a stand at a farmer's market, and you don't have to be a farmer. And there are tons of people that go to those farmer markets who are very environmentally minded. They're often homeowners. And so that's kind of like exactly our customer base. And we could end up talking to like dozens and dozens of people for what, like $50, what it costs to have a booth there. So we're trying to think of kind of ways to get in person with people, because a lot of the like lead generation platforms and a lot of the digital marketing stuff is great, but you have to kind of sift through a lot of people that are either not interested at all or very like casually interested. Like they're like, oh, I just wanted to know how much it costs, but like I'm not planning on getting the system. Right. So if you can kind of skip to the part where you're talking to somebody, then that helps you out a lot. And so we're trying to find a number of ways to do that. I think word of mouth is a big one. The more we can kind of have some kind of viral marketing component where we're incentivizing word of mouth, the better. And then finding ways to kind of get in front of people in person in places where they're kind of amenable to being curious and talking and don't feel like they're being sold to too much. Because there is the door-to-door approach, but I've never been super happy to see a door-to-door salesperson. And that's not kind of the relationship that we want to have with our customers. Our sales process, unlike a lot of other solar installers, is very hands-off. We want you to make the right decision. We don't want you to go with us unless you feel comfortable, right? And a lot of solar installers are like, I'm not going to leave until they have gotten the solar system from us, regardless of how much I have to like push them around or make them feel like they have to, right? We don't operate that way. So we're very much focused on building long-term relationships and actually following up with our customers after the system is installed to say, how are you liking it? What's your electric bill looking at? Are people liking the way that it looks on your house? Whatever. Have you seen your home price go up on Zillow, which some people have reported that they have? And so following up with people and kind of nurturing those relationships in the beginning is a big part of our strategy, because we think if we leave everybody with a really good feeling about us, then they're going to talk about us more and refer us more. And also, we want our customers to be happy because they enable us to do what we do. This is a much more fun job than a lot of the things that I've done. So I genuinely appreciate them and want to make sure that they're happy. So that's kind of a little bit about what we're thinking about. The marketing aspect, definitely something we are still learning about, very much open to input on that.
Amazing. Well, I'm rooting for you. I love the kind of philosophy and the approach that you're coming with, really not trying to strong arm people, being in consideration, that kind of like, it's not like the same as like the environmental impact, but it is kind of this like, with my brand too, New Earth Entrepreneurs, this kind of new way of doing things that I imagine is part of a full environmental, the social aspects of how we're operating as entrepreneurs and business owners, but we're not unaware of the kinds of impacts that our personalities and the ways that we're approaching these relationships are really happening. So I appreciate hearing about that. If you got time for it, I got just a few ones going more into kind of like entrepreneurial in general, and a closing question as well, if you still got the time.
Yeah, I got time.
Amazing. So just as someone who's navigating involved in multiple startups, how do you balance your roles at HydroPhos, Green Lightning, and your other endeavors?
Difficult for a while, I was actually the CEO of both companies at the same time. And it was kind of like, when you're running a startup, there's always like the kind of fires that you have to put out. But when you have multiple companies with fires and they're happening at the same time, that starts to become really stressful and things start to break a little bit. And so I've just cultivated like the best people. Like I work with the best people and there's a lot of delegation. But also since, about a year ago when I was running both as the CEO, I've enabled leaders within those companies to kind of step up, take my place and run each individual company better than I would have as someone doing too much. So I've just had these incredible people in my life that have been able to make these businesses go well. And I'm very lucky that they allow me to still be a part of the business and add my own kind of value. But I would say, if I could do it all over again, it's definitely much better to focus on one thing at a time. That's kind of the advice I'd pass along to anybody doing this kind of stuff. Focus on one thing at a time. I heard this one thing that's like you have 50 years in your life to make your career make the impact in the world that you want to do, 50 working years, of course. And so when you think about it that way, you tend to get a little less impatient about wanting to do everything at once, which is what I did. But, it's worked out. I'm actually very happy with the outcomes. And yeah, I would say just relying on great people, being a student of the game of productivity and efficiency certainly helps, but you're only one person. So make sure you're surrounding yourself with good people that kind of add and make it so you don't have to spend so much time because they're just killing it.
Amazing. That might actually be the same thing that my other question was going to be for what advice you would give other entrepreneurs who are working on sustainability focused startups and facing similar early stage challenges. So the people, the focusing on one thing, but if you had anything else too, you might offer as words of wisdom.
Yeah, I have two more things I would add. First, along the lines of the people, is it's so important to invest in your people, including yourself. So when I started the solar business, for example, my co-founder, he knew a lot about solar. I knew almost nothing about it. One of our first uses of company money was to buy some courses for me to take to learn how solar technology works. I actually went up on the roof to do our mom systems because in New Hampshire, self-installation is legal. So I actually have done solar installations myself. So I learned how it works, right? And so I've applied that same approach with any team that I work on. It's like somebody might not have the skills today, but if you take a really long-term view of business and you invest in people, then those people are going to grow to be amazing leaders in your company. If you don't invest in people and say you're the leader today, you're going to have to do everything yourself for a long time. And that's not fun. And even more so, it's not fun for your employees and your fellow team members when they don't feel like they're being trusted to do the important things in the company. And so that's one thing that I would kind of pass along. Super important to invest in people and allow people to fail, right? Like at the end of the day, it's very rare that there would be one failure that kind of tanks the whole business. So letting people fail is part of the learning process. So allowing people to do that, I think, is really important. And then the last thing I'd say is searching for win-win solutions every opportunity that you can get. Like the biggest kind of sticking point for anybody with a new company is that they're worried if it will work for them because you have a different approach. As long as you can find a way to have a win-win solution where genuinely everybody benefits from this new solution, as opposed to kind of viewing business in a zero-sum game where I'm gonna try and extract as much value as I can from every deal. Every time I talk to somebody, I'm just looking for how I can get money from them. If you take a more long-term perspective and look for those win-win solutions, that's how you're going to build really meaningful long-term relationships that grow a business from this tiny little startup stage to a business that is established and trusted and all of those great things that you want. So that's kind of some of the things that I've learned along the way. I'm still very much in the learning stage more so than in the giving advice stage, but those are some of the few things that I would pass along to anybody interested in entrepreneurship.
Amazing. Yeah, we've gotten those lessons fresh from your from your experience. They're just coming online and amazing. I mean, those golden words of advice to invest in oneself, invest in the team, and really make sure that you're surrounding yourself and allowing people to grow, allowing people to sort of trial and error, struggle, fail, and succeed. My kind of like final question I've got for you, just looking forward, what are you most excited about in the next phase of growth for both companies?
Yeah. I mean, I would say for HydroPhos, we're on the cusp of being able to actually get in the field and commercialize, which is really exciting because, like I said, just one wastewater treatment plant is enough to feed about 80,000 people in terms of the phosphorus, and we're helping preserve a waterway, which is really exciting. I think a lot of entrepreneurs, they get really, really excited about the global view and like, okay, when we're in $100 billion company, we'll have this kind of impact. But to me, if you focus too much on that big picture, you really lose out on the fun along the way that you get from even, working with one customer. For example, with Green Lightning, as I was saying, one customer, you save 16,200 gallons of water every year. That's an awesome impact. You don't need to wait until you've saved 1 billion gallons of water to be happy. And so, but ultimately, I'd say with HydroPhos, the commercialization is really exciting. And I think for Green Lightning, just being able to scale up our business and impact more people is really exciting for us because solar is like the ultimate win-win. It's like it's great for the environment and it saves the homeowners money. We're looking forward to forming partnerships so that we can offer things like PPAs and leases. We prefer to make it so people can buy it up front because then your return on investment is better. But for those people that really, really struggle to buy upfront, we want to have that as an option. So that's one thing we're kind of looking forward to. And we're also looking forward to our Solar Horizons program, kind of getting more people interested in that. So just like brief background, your Solar Horizons program gives a further discount from current discount already to veterans and people who kind of live below a living wage. And so again, kind of making solar more accessible, bringing down that initial cost and putting all of that together. We have now been in business for over a year. So we're looking forward to applying for the B Corp certification. Actually, in college, I used to consult and help people get B Corp certified. So luckily, all of those skills are kind of coming back. And so that's one thing that we're really excited about as kind of a way to showcase our impact and use the rigorous B impact assessment to continue to make our business better and better. Because just because we're a solar company doesn't mean there aren't other areas that we can improve on from an impact perspective. So that's another thing. There's so many things to look forward to with each company. I think they're both on a really exciting trajectory, and I'm really proud of the teams that have been able to kind of make all of that magic happen. It's very humbling.
Yeah, a lot of moving parts. It's exciting to hear, listen to just see kind of what the development has been like, where it is that you've come from, gotten to, and then to think about. I like what you say too about there's the big grand visions, the $100 billion company valuations, but those small steps too. Yeah, really taking the time to kind of stop and smell the roses. I think those are great words to share with folks, and I'm excited and glad to hear about that process and this journey for you that you're on. I'll say it's been a pleasure talking. I definitely appreciate the insights that you've shared and getting to hear about your journey. And I'm looking forward to seeing how both HydroPhos and Green Lightning Energy continue to evolve.
It's a real pleasure. You've asked great questions and been a pleasure to speak to, so I appreciate it.
Absolutely.